I didn't think about much. I did my job every day. I didn't assume that I had to do it. Instead, I told myself, I've gained another day today. I'm still alive. I've made it this far. I can survive another day.
From September to December 1944, a subcamp of the Neuengamme concentration camp existed near Husum, the Husum-Schwesing subcamp. Several thousand men from all over Europe were brought here. They were forced to perform hard labor at construction sites of the Friesenwall, a series of defense fortifications. Hundreds of them died from malnutrition, sickness, or as a result of maltreatment. One man who managed to survive his imprisonment at the Husum-Schwesing concentration camp was Wim Aloserij from the Netherlands. In November 2017, he gave an interview at the Haus der Gegenwart, at the Husum-Schwesing Memorial. Wim Aloserij was born in Amsterdam on the 8th of August 1923, where he grew up in humble conditions. He lived in the city's Kattenburg neighborhood, together with his mother, sister, half-brother, and stepfather. His childhood was heavily influenced by his violent stepfather, with Wim often having to hide to escape his beatings.
No, I went to school until I was 14 years old, at which point my stepfather died, and I had to work to support my family. The pre-war years were hard. Work was scarce. The financial situation was bad, which is why, even though I was only 14, I had to work to support my family. I had to stop attending school. My first job was in the sales department of a factory that made wallpaper. But I had a neighbour who owned a butchery. And he said to me, Wim, I'm going to train you up to become a store manager. It was a good offer. So I said, I'll do it. So I became a butcher's apprentice. And I did that for several years.
When Wim was 16 years old, Poland was taken over by National Socialist Germany. 9 months later, in May 1940, Germany also attacked the Netherlands. Wim remembers what the German occupation was like.
It kept getting worse, especially when it came to food. You could only pay for things in marks. While the Germans mostly left us alone, they weren't as peaceful towards everyone. They showed hostility towards the Jews and many other people. But that didn't affect us. I did my job, and that was it. Then came the order calling all young men to go to Germany. But I didn't go. Then a soldier came to our shop with a Dutchman, and he said, he can leave. I had to report to an office where I was told, you're going to Germany. If you don't go, your mother won't get any more money. She was receiving a subsidy from the social welfare office. So I went. I reported to the main train station in Amsterdam, where I was put on the train to Braunschweig.
Wim was 19 years old when he was forced to work in Germany. In the racist National Socialist worldview, Dutch people were considered better than others, for example, from Central and Eastern Europe. For that reason, Wim was also subject to less discrimination than other forced labourers. In addition, his ability to quickly adjust to new conditions served him well.
When the train arrived in Braunschweig, I had to report to a kind of labour office. I got onto the tram and there I met a fellow Dutchman who had already been working in Germany for some years. The man started speaking to me and asked, "What are you doing here then?" "I have to register in such and such a place because I have to work." "Oh," he said, "that's not so great. I wouldn't recommend that. I've something else for you."
The Dutchman advised Wim to apply for a job with the tram service. Wim did, in fact, succeed in getting a job there.
But I was a butcher, not a metal worker, so I had to be retrained there. I arrived at a kind of training facility for the tram service and had to learn things like filing, drilling and building fuses. But I didn't enjoy the work, so I always skived off. One time, I took a break in the afternoon with some French prisoners of war. We went swimming in a lake. And then, when I came back, the master said, "Wim, where were you?" I said, "I was here." "No," he said, "you weren't here. Watch out, boy, because you're causing problems for me. You have to learn and then you'll work for us." So that was how things went for a while. Then one of the bosses came and said, "Now you've completed your training, there's a job in the workshop for you." So I had to go to the workshop, a big factory. There I had to learn how to weld and make bearings.
Working conditions got worse after moving to the factory. Wim was under stricter surveillance, was no longer able to take any afternoon breaks, and had to work with toxic substances. When his German foreman was called up to the German army, he was supposed to take over his tasks. He then decided to return to the Netherlands. Although this was forbidden, he set off in spring 1944, accompanied by another Dutchman he had met in Braunschweig. Wim succeeded in crossing the border and made it to Amsterdam. As a fugitive forced labourer, he had to lay low. First, he hid at his sister's home for several days. Then in North Holland, where a family living between Zwaag and Blokke took Wim in. Following an assassination attempt by the Dutch resistance movement, it became too dangerous there. The German occupiers began carrying out more and more raids. A farming family helped him to hide at Baasdorper Meer.
The farmer was a very nice man. I learned something about agriculture. I didn't sleep at the farm, but had buried a crate in the ground outside. That was where I slept, totally hidden.
He spent the summer of 1944 there, until he was arrested, together with others.
I met some people who were also in hiding. There were 3 of us. One day, while we were walking through the pastures, we were found by the Landwacht. They were armed Dutch citizens who worked for the Germans. They then arrested us. We were brought to the police station in Hoorn, and on the next day to the security service in Amsterdam. We spent a few days with the security service and were interrogated. There we sat in cells in the basement. We were then brought to prison in Amsterdam. I was there for about 2 to 3 weeks. It was awful. Everything was full of bugs. And from there, we were brought to the Amersfoort camp.
Because he had fled and gone into hiding, the German occupiers charged Wim with refusal to work. At the end of August, he was brought to the Amersfoort interim camp. Looking back, he says,
The Amersfoort camp was a tough camp, but it was tolerable. There were tolerable bunks and the food was tolerable. There were roll calls and violence, but not as much as elsewhere.
Wim spent just 10 days in Amersfoort before being deported to Hamburg's Neuengamme concentration camp. He describes what happened to new prisoners.
Chaos. Lots of beatings started straight away. People had to give up everything they were wearing. Any hair was shaven off. They were humiliated and given a number.
The SS welcomed new prisoners with a special degree of brutality in order to break their spirits and morale immediately upon arrival. Anything the prisoners still had with them was confiscated.
I had a suit, a wristwatch, nice shoes, because I used to be a bit vain. I was always buying nice clothes and shoes, and I had them on again. I had a smart suit. But it disappeared. It was taken from me, and you weren't anything anymore. I was given a number with the country of origin, Holland. We're from the Netherlands, right? But they always said we were from Holland. My number in Neuengamme was 49,019.
After a few weeks at the Neuengamme concentration camp, Wim was brought to the Husum-Schwesing subcamp. On the 25th of September 1944, he and 1,500 other prisoners arrived at the camp, which had originally been built for a maximum of 400 construction workers or soldiers. On the 19th of October, 1,000 other concentration camp prisoners followed, making the subcamp completely overcrowded.
Compared to Neuengamme, it was a terrible camp. Truly. Right from the start, as soon as I saw it, I thought, this is going to be tough. And then I thought, I'm going to try and survive anyway.
At the start of November, 1,000 prisoners were moved from Husum-Schwesing to a newly built subcamp in Ladelund. The two subcamps in North Friesland were built because of the so-called Friesenwall. Since the upper ranks of the German army feared an Allied attack on the coast of the North Sea, extensive defence fortifications were built under extreme pressure in the autumn of 1944. Numerous prisoners of war, forced labourers, and concentration camp prisoners were put to work here. They had to perform extremely hard labour for their German oppressors. The camp prisoners had to dig deep trenches to ward off tanks. Malnourished and weakened, most were barely able to make it through the workday. On top of that, the prisoners were often beaten, whether to make them work harder, punish them, or for no reason at all.
One time, when I was working, another prisoner made a mistake and I got the blame. I was beaten and then fell down the hillside. And then I thought, this is not going to go well. I'm not going to survive this. So I had an idea. I took broken shovels that I'd stuck under my arm and walked along the rows as if that was what I was supposed to be doing, repairing shovels, putting them together. I did that for 2 days. After 2 days, I thought, if they catch me, then it's over. They'll beat me to death.
That evening, Wim spoke to another prisoner from France, whom he had known from Neuengamme. Before and after working on the construction sites, the Frenchman had also worked at the sick bay. As he was unable to do this any longer, Wim decided to try for the post in the sick bay.
So I went to the doctor. I said, can I help? And because I offered, the man thought that I must be a nurse. Yes, he said, you can come here before you head out. When they head out, you have to go with them. And when you come back, you can help out again. Yes, okay, I'll do that.
But instead of going to the roll call and the construction site, Wim hid. Once the other prisoners had left the camp, he went back to the sick bay.
The signal came. I think it was a bell. The work details were counted, went out, and were gone. Then I went to the sick barracks and returned to the doctor. He said, "Oh, what have you done? You can't do that. I'm only allowed to have one nurse. Oh, this is bad." I said, "Don't worry, I'm already taking care of that."
While the doctor didn't agree, Wim was able to stay out of sight throughout the day, and so was able to stay on as a nurse at the sickbay. At the start, the sickbay only consisted of one of the 9 barracks being used to house the prisoners. Due to the hard work, poor diet, and lack of cleanliness, more and more prisoners became sick, and the sickbay was expanded to include further barracks. Around 750 seriously ill prisoners deemed unfit to work were brought back to Neuengamme. For SS-Untersturmführer Hans Griem, this was not about saving lives. He was only interested in getting able-bodied men to replace them.
Hitler had commanded us to build anti-tank ditches in just a short period of time, and we had to do this as quickly as possible. Nobody would even dream of asking normal, healthy people to do the work that was being demanded of us. It took so much effort. Some people would go to work in the morning and come back dead. They were exhausted. Your body would completely overheat out there. And the longer the work took, the more sick there were who were just no longer able to do it. Barracks after barracks therefore became a sick ward.
Wim's role as a nurse not only spared him the tough labour at the Friesenwall and the mistreatment during the roll call. Being a nurse came with extra benefits. He came into contact with kapos, prisoners given certain tasks by the SS. These prisoner functionaries had to keep an eye on the other prisoners during forced labour or in the accommodation quarters. Others, for example, worked in the prisoner's kitchen or the office. To avoid losing their privileged position, all kapos had to serve the interests of the SS. While their scope for action was highly restricted, they were able to use it for or against their fellow prisoners.
Once, when I was working there at the doctor's, the capo from the kitchen came to me. He said, "I have a cut on my leg." I said, "I have something for that." So I threw my weight around. I looked at his leg. A pot of ointment was sitting there, cod liver oil ointment, and I put some of it on the cut. We had crepe paper, but not bandaging material. I said, "It'll be fine. It's already getting better." I said, "But how about..." "Oh," he said, "you'll have to come to the hatch behind the kitchen tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. He said, "Knock and I'll make something for you." So I went there at 6 in the morning and had food.
Other prisoner functionaries became sick and had to be treated at the sickbay.
And then it so happened that the camp senior, not the camp manager, but the camp senior, a prisoner, had a secretary. So the doctor said to me, "There's something wrong with his ear. You need to rinse out the ear." So I went to the secretary and cleaned his ear. I said, "How about some food?" Because he had food. So I got food again. Essentially, I had a kind of job in the camp that meant I didn't have to do any digging. meaning that for the last few months I wasn't digging. This enabled me to survive, and I had a job that brought me in contact with people who had food. So I always had something, not a lot, not an excessive amount, to eat time and time again. I didn't look so emaciated and like a skeleton anymore.
While capos were tasked with keeping an eye on other prisoners, the only way they came to the sickbay was as a patient.
Those we treated at the doctors were only thinking, I need to get well. They weren't checking with me, what exactly are you doing? They saw me working and thought, oh, he's a nurse, he works there. They accepted it. If you just do something, then people accept it, even if it's a role you've invented for yourself. I showed my face as little as possible, which wasn't so difficult as the SS didn't come into the sick barracks. They were scared of diseases, so I was safe there. I stayed in the background as much as possible. The ones who went out front were always seen. Not me, the invisible man.
Wim didn't dwell on the time before the war, the Netherlands or Amsterdam.
Once you start brooding, it was bad. Oh, at home things were like that, and at home... It would make you homesick. Then you would feel down. My only focus was, how can I survive this day? I therefore lived one day at a time. And then I could see whether I could get my hands on something. Food. That was the main goal. Food. And regarding the rest, I adapted as much as possible. And as I keep saying, not being seen.
Not standing out was part of Wim's strategy. The prisoners themselves were very isolated, with only a few exceptions.
Those who may have lived in the same city, like those from Putten, did things together. But the other prisoners were separated. There was actually no sense of loyalty among them. You were always on your own. If you happened to meet someone you knew, that didn't mean that you'd stick together, because you were focused on surviving at the cost of many things. People did many things that perhaps they would never have done before. Stealing bread, for example. Because there was no solidarity among the prisoners.
In Husum-Schwesing, Wim met one of the two men he had gone underground with in Bas-Doppermeer.
I was at the roll call site, and a skeleton came towards me. But I knew from his face that it was the man I had been captured with. But he had wrapped a blanket around himself and was no longer able to hold anything. He was somewhere far away, mumbling something. I thought, what is that? It's over for that guy. And it just so happened that it was the man I had been captured with. He was close to the end. That was how I came across him. It was a really tough blow. When you think about it, he was a young man who wanted to be a singer. While we were in hiding, he was always singing. He had a positive outlook on the future. And then it was over.
Out of the 300 to 500 prisoners who died at the Husum-Schwesing subcamp due to disease, exhaustion and severe mistreatment, a particularly large number of them were from the Netherlands. The bodies were brought to Husum's Ostfriedhof cemetery and buried in mass graves. At the end of December 1944, the Husum-Schwesing subcamp was cleared out. Any prisoners still alive were brought back to the Neuengamme concentration camp. From there, they were either transferred to other subcamps or stayed in the main camp, where they were assigned to specific work details. As an exhausted prisoner, Wim was put in a recuperation detail and had to make camouflage nets for military equipment.
We had to weave things for the cannons and tanks. While the work itself was not difficult, the food was not good and you had to work quite a lot for it.
Wim knew that he didn't want to stay in the recuperation detail. The prisoners were taken care of too poorly there to be able to survive for long.
One day, a foreman came and asked if there was a painter among us. I said, "I'm a painter." He said, "You're a painter?" I said, "Yes, I'm a painter." I had never painted before, but I wanted out of there, the chance to finally get out. "Well," he said, "come with me." So he took me with him. Then I had to paint a rail car that the SS was using as accommodation. They were repairing the railway infrastructure using prisoners. He handed me a tin of paint and a paintbrush. He said, "Get on with it." So I started to paint. He said, "That's no good, come here." He showed me how I was supposed to do it. I copied him perfectly. Sometime later, an SS officer came over, looked around and said I was a good painter.
Thanks to the foreman, Wim was able to stay in the painting detail. Then he was assigned to other details in the main camp. He managed to avoid being transferred to one of the subcamps where many prisoners died. From the 20th of April 1945 onwards, the Neuengamme concentration camp was cleared out. Wim was among the around 10,000 prisoners who were brought to the Bay of Lübeck on freight trains. There, the SS packed the prisoners onto ships provided to them by the Navy, including the former luxury steamer Cap Arcona and the Tielbeck cargo ship. The ships were painted in military colours and not marked as prison ships. During a British aerial attack aimed at stopping German troops fleeing across the Baltic Sea, the ships were set on fire. The prisoners were trapped in the cargo holds, most of them below sea level.
There was a huge panic. I ran outside. I thought, either I jump into the sea or I burn to death. I went to the railing, thinking it must be some 15 meters high. I'm not fit, I'll not make it. But I wanted off the ship. Then I saw a rope hanging. I got undressed and used the rope to get down to the sea. It was very cold, I think 8 degrees. It had been a hard winter. But what now? About 8 meters away, I saw an inflatable boat with nobody on it. So I swam over to it, and another person climbed up into it with a shaven head and gaunt face. A prisoner. We then brought on board a few prisoners who were drifting further away, and together we reached the coast.
Only a few of the 7,000 prisoners made it into the water from the 2 burning, sinking ships. While guards were rescued on other boats, prisoners were shot. Many of those who managed to reach land were killed on the beach. 6,600 prisoners from the Cap Arcona and Tielbeck died a few hours before the British Army liberated the Bay of Lübeck. Only 450 survived. At this moment, Wim couldn't yet believe that he was being set free in the midst of such tragedy. Wim spent a short time recovering in a British sickbay before heading to Hamburg with other liberated prisoners. After Germany surrendered, he travelled to the Netherlands by military transport. On the 30th of May 1945, he reached his old home in Amsterdam. He had survived, but it was difficult to just start a new life.
I got sick. There was something wrong with my lungs, and mentally I was broken. I had concentration camp syndrome. As a child, I had a Jewish doctor. He had survived the war and helped me at this time. I had to rest at home, not in the hospital, at home, until I was better again. But after becoming a Jehovah's Witness, I acquired a newfound optimism. A new world is coming, a world ruled by Jesus, a world of peace and safety. And that helped me to push this suffering from the camp aside. Then I met my wife in August 1945. She was a nurse, and I got to know her. She also had a very positive attitude to life. She was a strong person who took good care of me. Both my faith and my wife helped me, and the doctor, because they were there during that time when I had this concentration camp syndrome. It made me very anxious at night when I felt as though I were being hunted and had problems. And then my wife said, "Wim, you're like a wolf howling at night. Lie on your other side." So she always helped me.